let's get into the second point, which I think is everyone wants to hear about. So the Google interview. How intimidating was that?
It was intimidating, quite intimidating, especially for me because I was doing it in Spanish. So
Oh, wow.
yeah. That made it a lot more complicated for me, not being my native language. But regardless, it's your native language or not, it's going to be intimidating. It's notoriously difficult, like most tech interviews. And I'm sure that my experience would very much reflect the experience of a tech interview at any of those top companies. But so my experience, or this would be my opinion in case our listeners want to have some like advice if they're going to go after tech interviews. And from my own experience, I would say the key is, first of all, lots and lots of preparation. This is obvious, but I feel like people do not put in the time that they should have. And when you're working in tech, you can find practice interview questions online, on blogs, on YouTube, to help you practice. So I would say if you get invited into one of these interview processes, give yourself a crash course in interviewing in tech. I mean, dedicate a lot of time with the resources you can find online.
Have you talked to Tina Huang?
No.
Okay, so she's been on the podcast, and she won't say it's one of the FAANG, I guess it's FAANG now, like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, or Google. So she's a data scientist there. And she talked about how the way that she prepared for that tech interview, she went to Glassdoor. And since it's a big company and a lot of people have gone through that interview, there are people who are now kind of writing down their experience. So she used that as not only like market research of like what are the types of questions, but then kind of the responses as well.
Yeah, and my experience with Glassdoor is it's a lot more used in the US. Living in Spain, I realize it's not so used there, but regardless, it's probably one of the best sources. And then there's lots of other sources. You can find people who write blogs on it and YouTube, like I said. But I used a mix of resources of everything I could find online, like tips into the type of interview that for my role, because you also need to make sure you're looking into what role are you interviewing for, find interview questions that would be relevant for that type of role.
Awesome. So I guess walk us through, maybe even back up. How did you even get the opportunity? Did you just apply on like LinkedIn or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people know it. I was contacted on LinkedIn.
Ooh, that is juicy. Wait, why? Wait, have you talked to the person about that? I'm fascinated, I guess personally, but also on behalf of the audience. What was that like? What was the bait? What was the hook that kind of like brought them to you?
Yeah, and we'll probably get into it later, because if you're going to ask me about advice for working in the field, I always emphasize the importance of LinkedIn. So building a brand on there and just being active, and for people to associate your name to your field. In this case, for people to associate you to analytics or data. And the person I got contacted just because my activity on LinkedIn, and kind of they connected my name to analytics and data. And they reached out to me and said, we have an opening on our team, and I think you might be good for it. I would love to just chat with you over a coffee, hear about what you're currently doing, and see if you might be a good fit for our team. So that started off just a casual chat and then a coffee. From there, I did not get in on the first try. So that process that I entered into, they ended up finding a better candidate. But I didn't let that get me down, because you have to realize that you go into these interviews, but just because they don't pick you, it doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It just might be that in that case, for that role, for that team, they found somebody who just fit a little bit better. So I actually didn't get it on the first try. It took me 2-3 processes, but the thing was that they liked me from those first interviews, and they said, okay, you weren't our first pick this time. We had somebody more qualified for the role, but we want to stay in contact for when we have another similar role opening. And then they ended up having that role opening. They contacted me again, went through the process again, and I eventually made it in.
Wow. I love that gumption.
Yeah. But I think, and it's a key also with tech, is persistence. Do not get down if you don't get chosen, if you get knocked out the first round, it doesn't matter. Go back and try again, and you're probably going to get better over time because you're going to learn from those interviews and you're going to learn from your experience.
So that's a really interesting concept, because that's something that I'm really trying to kind of hammer home with my students, is that you need to look at progress as an iterative thing. It's not like you do all the hard work and then you get one exam. And I think that this is kind of like a downside of education, is that they train people to, you study and study and then you have one opportunity. The way that I'm grading my Tableau public portfolios is kind of the way that my consulting kind of engagements work, is that I'll send my client a prototype dashboard, and then they'll study it, maybe work with it, find some insights, and then they'll come back with me and say, hey, add this KPI, drop that chart, change the color here. It needs to be branded. We don't use that logo anymore. And then I'll come back with a new and improved version of it. And sometimes, these improvements might span, the longest client I've had so far is 4 years. And we've just kind of had these like little iterations, and all of a sudden now they have like a robust analytics reporting platform. So I think that is a mindset that a lot of people need to take on, is that, it's more about sustaining a long-term effort than putting all of your ducks or all of your eggs into one basket and then saying, here, if I don't make it this time, I'm done and I'm going to quit.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say +1 to both sides. So I do something very similar with dashboards that will have like this feedback loop. I try to avoid like the continuous loop, but what I do is offering like in bulk. So I'll make, the prototype, give them the prototype, they give me back feedback in bulk, I incorporate it, and then we might do a revision, every 6 months in case they need to change something. But absolutely, you don't just have one, you don't just launch and that's it. And it's the same in real life, that it's not just one chance, and you need to be persistent and you need to keep a smile on your confidence. You're going to have more chances. So don't worry.
Right. I think it kind of, another way of framing that is, you need to take a systems thinking approach to, not only your problem solving, but also your career advancement.
Yeah, of course. That's how I do it.
Okay. So you got rejected the first time, although maybe I'm putting it too harsh. It didn't quite work out the first time. So how did you get your second opportunity at Google?
So we stayed in touch, like I said, and I recommend this for others. If you do get denied or you don't make it to the next step, that's not a problem. Try to get feedback if you can. It really does matter, depends on the recruiting team and the management, but ask them if they can give you feedback on maybe what you could improve for next time. But anyways, I stayed very positive, asked for feedback, said I was very much interested in case they had another role opening in the future. So we stayed in touch, and they did have another similar role that opened, a few more months down the line. So I entered another process of interviews, and it ended up, working in my favor. I eventually got into Google, and there's actually a lot more to the story. I entered via like a project-based role, and then I had to interview further to get a full-time position. So I was like a temporary project-based role at the start. I had to find even a way to get in as full-time. So there were more processes down the line. So moral of the story is I didn't get in on my first or second try. You need to keep trying, and it might take you a few more, but I stayed positive throughout, and it got me to where I am today. So no complaining.
Okay, so could you talk about the interview process, or is that something off limits?
The process, I can't share too much besides, what you would find online. But what I could share is a couple of tips. They're just personal tips from me that I would suggest to others to kind of to stand out from the crowd. So the first thing I would say is make sure that you are ready to sell yourself off of your CV. So have your elevator pitch ready. Because the recruiters, the hiring team, they're going to read your CV, of course. They might read your LinkedIn. But if you go into the room and they tell you, okay, tell me about yourself, what are you going to say? You got a couple minutes to sell yourself. So be ready to take advantage of those couple minutes to not just be rephrasing exactly what's on your CV. Take advantage of those minutes and say what's not so obvious about your journey, your path, because this is your first impression, and we all know that first impressions are key. They last.
Will you give us an example? So I think the
Oh, you
audience.
cannot put me on the pit. You cannot put me
No,
on the
no,
spot
no,
like
no.
that. I don't know. And this is something that you have to practice. So if I had known you were going
Really?
to ask me this today, I would have practiced and made a killer one.
Well, okay. Well, I feel like that is a signal into itself. So
What do you mean?
this is not a casual thing. It's not
Oh
like
no.
something that you come off the cuff. It's something that do you have any thoughts on like how did you write yours?
A lot of, like I said, this is something that you need to practice a lot and put a lot of thought into. How are you going to make yourself sound special and make yourself stand out? And
Mhm.
also just to start off on the right foot with the recruiter, because you don't want to literally repeat what is on your CV. You can say what's on your CV, but another way of doing it, connect the dots. And then also, and this was another tip that I was going to give, so I can kind of connect it into the second tip. And that is to find yourself a way to stand out from the candidate pool. So I know you probably have a strong, strong professional experience or a great, strong education. But even with a strong background in both senses, what else can make you stand out if all of the other candidates also have strong experience and a strong education? Because that's typical when you're
Right.
applying in tech. So it can be anything like a volunteer initiative or a startup or a side project, but something that can help that team remember you and also show them that you have a passion for something, to kind of bring the human side of things. So even in that elevator pitch, depending on what it is, you might be able to throw it into there. And it might not be something that you've highlighted so much on your CV, but something that could make them remember you.